Standing in the corner of the company's lavish annual gala, I endured the open mockery of my in-laws while wiping sticky champagne from my cheap suit. They called me a corporate parasite, loudly laughing at my lack of ambition while my brother-in-law, Vincent, staged a scene to frame me as a drunk in front of HR. The shame of being treated like hired help by my own family made my blood boil, but I stayed silent and observed their arrogance. What they didn't know was that the low-level analyst they were plotting to fire had just been appointed chairman of the board. Within 48 hours, the very people laughing at me would be clearing out their desks under the supervision of security. Before we continue, please hit that like button and subscribe for more satisfying revenge stories like this one. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Are you in New York, Chicago, London, or Sydney? I'm so curious about our global audience. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the penthouse ballroom of the St. Regis, a space that smelled of expensive perfume, old money, and the distinct metallic scent of ambition. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a kaleidoscope of light over the crowd. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets moved like ghosts through the throngs of executives, balancing trays of champagne and caviar with practiced indifference. It was the kind of room designed to make you feel small unless you owned it, and looking around at the sea of bespoke Italian wool and silk, I knew exactly who owned it. Beside me, Jennifer smoothed the front of her emerald gown for the 10th time since we left the lobby. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her clutch. "Please, Gary," she whispered, not looking at me. "Just try to blend in tonight. Daddy's already on edge about the quarterly projections. He doesn't need any distractions." "I'm just here to support you, Jen," I said, keeping my voice mild. I tugged at the cuff of my suit. It was a department store purchase, polyester blend, slightly too boxy in the shoulders. It was the perfect camouflage. To the people in this room, a bad suit was an invisibility cloak. It signaled that you were irrelevant, a non-entity, someone who existed merely to fill space in a room where the real players made moves. "Just don't talk shop," she hissed as we stepped onto the marble floor. "And for God's sake, don't bring up your situation." By situation, she meant my job, or rather the lack of a prestigious one. To Jennifer and her family, my freelance data analyst role was synonymous with unemployment. They didn't know that for the past 6 months, my freelance work had been a forensic audit commissioned by the board of directors. They didn't know that the client I was always on the phone with was the chairman of the audit committee. And they certainly didn't know that the ink was currently drying on a contract that named me the new interim CEO, tasked with cleaning up the mess her father had made. We navigated the crowd, Jennifer's smile plastered on like a shield. We didn't have to look far to find them. The royal family of Sterling Corp was holding court near the center of the room, naturally. Vincent, my father-in-law and the current VP of operations, stood with a scotch in one hand, gesturing broadly to a circle of sycophants. He looked like a silver-haired lion, imposing and immaculately groomed, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my car. Next to him was Rihanna, my mother-in-law and the VP of Human Resources. She was draped in a shimmering silver gown, her neck adorned with a diamond choker that I recognized immediately. I had seen the receipt for it just 3 days ago while reviewing the discretionary spending accounts. It was categorized under client relations. As we approached, the circle seemed to tighten, a subconscious defensive formation. It was Rihanna who spotted us first. Her gaze raked over Jennifer with approval before sliding to me where it curdled into something between pity and disgust. "Jennifer, darling," Rihanna exclaimed, extending a manicured hand but not stepping forward. She offered her cheek for a sterile air kiss. "You look stunning. Finally wearing that color I suggested." "Hi, Mom. You look beautiful," Jennifer said, her voice pitching up an octave. "And Gary," Vincent boomed, finally acknowledging my existence. He didn't offer a hand. Instead, he took a sip of his scotch, his eyes drifting over my shoulder as if looking for someone more important. "Surprised you could make it. I thought cover charges were steep this year." The sycophants laughed. I forced a polite, bewildered smile. "Jen treated me. It's a nice venue, Vincent." "It's the St. Regis, Gary. It's not nice. It's the standard," Vincent corrected, his tone dripping with the fatigue of explaining the world to a toddler. He turned his back to me, addressing a man to his left. So, as I was saying, the overhead in logistics is unavoidable. You have to spend money to make money. I stood there, feeling the heat of humiliation radiating off Jennifer, who refused to meet my eyes. I was standing in the inner circle of the family, yet I was miles away. I watched Vincent laugh, knowing that the unavoidable overhead he was talking about included his leased Bentley and the renovations on his summer home in the Hamptons. Rihanna stepped closer, blocking my view of the rest of the room. She held her empty champagne flute out, dangling it delicately by the stem. "Gary," she said, her voice low and sharp, "do be a dear and do something useful while you're standing there gaping." I looked at the glass, then at her face. "You want me to get you a refill?" "I want you to get this out of my hand," she snapped quietly, her smile never wavering for the onlookers. "And if you see a waiter, tell them the service is lagging. Actually, maybe you should just head toward the kitchen. You look like you're dressed for the back of the house anyway. It's confusing the guests." Jennifer stiffened beside me, but said nothing. She took a sip of her wine, staring intently at a flower arrangement. The insult was precise, designed to remind me of my place in the hierarchy. To them, I wasn't family. I was an accessory that lowered the property value. I reached out and took the sticky glass from her hand. The crystal felt heavy and cold. "Of course, Rihanna," I said, keeping my voice steady, masking the voltage running through my veins. "I'd be happy to clear the table for you." "Good," she said, dismissing me with a wave of her hand as she turned back to the group. "Try not to break anything. We can't afford any more accidents." I walked away, the empty glass in my hand, the sound of their laughter following me like a draft. I headed toward the bar, but I didn't look for a waiter. I looked at the room. I saw the extravagance, the waste, the arrogance of people who thought the music would never stop. Vincent and Rihanna thought they were sending the help away. They didn't realize they had just handed the executioner a front row seat. I placed the glass on a passing tray and checked my watch. The board meeting was Monday morning at 8 a.m. I had 36 hours of being the sheep before the wolf came out to play. I made my way back to the group, the ghost of Rihanna's empty champagne glass still feeling heavy in my muscle memory. The air in the ballroom had grown warmer, thicker with the collective body heat of 300 people pretending to like each other. Near the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Sterling family circle had expanded. It wasn't just Vincent and Rihanna anymore. The Golden children had arrived. Henry and Bradley, Jennifer's older brothers, stood shoulder to shoulder like a two-headed hydra of corporate nepotism. They were physically similar, tall, soft around the middle despite expensive gym memberships, with hairlines that were retreating faster than their department's profit margins. They held court with 3 junior VPs who laughed a little too hard at everything they said. As I approached, Henry was in the middle of a story, gesturing wildly with a tumbler of bourbon. So I told the vendor, "Look, you want the Sterling account? You bleed for it. That's how we do business. We don't ask, we take." The group roared with approval. Bradley spotted me first, his eyes narrowing into a smirk that was as familiar to me as my own reflection. He nudged Henry, interrupting the war story. "Well, look who survived this service industry," Bradley called out, his voice pitched to carry over the ambient jazz. "Did you manage to find the kitchen, Gary, or did you get lost looking for the employee entrance?" Jennifer, standing slightly behind them, flinched. She took a quick, nervous sip of her wine, her eyes darting to the surrounding executives to gauge the damage. She didn't defend me. She never did. In the ecosystem of the Sterling family, you were either a predator or prey, and Jennifer had spent her life trying to convince herself she wasn't the latter. "I found the bar, Bradley," I said, sliding my hands into my pockets. "Rihanna needed a refill." "Always the helpful soul," Henry chimed in, stepping forward. "That's what we love about you, Gare. You know your lane. Low speed, safe, no passing." The junior VPs chuckled, exchanging glances. They sensed blood in the water. "We were just talking about the Q4 bonuses," Henry continued, leaning in close enough that I could smell the cigars and ambition on his breath. "Bradley and I are looking at new Porsches, maybe a boat. What about you, Gary? What's the freelance world paying out this quarter? Enough for a tank of gas?" "I'm doing okay," I said quietly. "Okay," Bradley laughed, shaking his head.
Gary, okay is for people who punch clocks. In this room, okay is a death sentence. You need that killer instinct. You need to want to rip the throat out of the competition. He turned to the group, performing for his audience. See, that's Gary's problem. No killer instinct. He's happy analyzing data spreadsheets in his pajamas while the big dogs hunt. I looked at Bradley, really looked at him. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I knew why he was sweating. I knew that the killer instinct he bragged about was actually a reckless gambling habit with company funds. My audit had flagged $300,000 in consulting fees paid to a shell company registered to Bradley's college roommate. The file on my encrypted drive at home detailed every transaction. I prefer to be thorough, I said, keeping my face blank. Sometimes the big dogs miss things when they're running too fast. Thorough, Henry mocked. Thorough is code for slow. Thorough is why you're driving a 5-year-old sedan and living in my sister's starter home. It's our home, Henry, Jennifer interjected, softly, though it sounded more like a plea than a defense. For now, Bradley said, winking at her. But let's be real, Jen. We all know who wears the pants in that house. Gary's basically a house husband in training. What's the plan, Gary? Wait for Jen to make VP so you can retire and focus on your sourdough starter? The laughter was louder this time. It was a jagged, ugly sound. I watched Vincent across the circle. He wasn't laughing, but he was watching with a look of bored satisfaction, like a Roman emperor watching a gladiator get mauled by a lion. He approved of this. In his mind, bullying was just a form of quality control. If I couldn't handle his sons, I didn't deserve his daughter. I support Jennifer's career, I said, my voice steady, cutting through their mirth. Company stability, Henry snorted into his bourbon. Gary, you wouldn't know company stability if it hit you with a foreclosure notice. You're playing in the sandbox. We're building empires. Entry-level mindset, probably muttered, turning his back on me to signal the conversation was over. That's why he'll never sit at the big table. Some people are born to lead, and some people are born to, well, fetch drinks for mom. They turned back to their circle, closing ranks, effectively boxing me out. Jennifer lingered for a second, her face pale. She touched my arm, her nails digging in slightly. Why do you let them talk to you like that? She whispered furiously. It makes you look so weak. I let them talk, Jen, I whispered back, because they have no idea who is listening. She pulled her hand away as if I'd burned her. God, you're impossible. Just go find somewhere else to be. You're embarrassing me. She turned and slipped into the gap between her brothers, laughing a little too loudly to Henry's next joke. I stood alone on the periphery, watching the Golden children high-five over a deal I knew they had already botched. They thought they were untouchable. They thought their lineage was a shield. But as I watched Bradley down the rest of his drink, I mentally moved his file from the probation stock to the immediate termination stock. The performance review was over. They just didn't realize they were the ones being graded.
The gala was beginning to blur into a carousel of excess. I had retreated to the periphery of the ballroom, nursing a club soda with lime, my third of the night, designed to look like a gin and tonic to avoid questions, but clear enough to keep my head razor sharp. From my vantage point near a towering ice sculpture of the company logo, I watched the Sterling family regroup. They were huddled near the dessert station, their heads bowed in conspiracy. It wasn't the casual huddle of family catching up, it was the tactical formation of wolves selecting a weak caribou. I saw Henry glance in my direction, his eyes locking onto me with a predatory glint, before whispering something to Vincent. Vincent nodded, a short, sharp motion, and gestured toward a passing waiter. I instinctively tapped the sleek, black device in my inner pocket, a high-fidelity dictaphone I'd been using to record board minutes, currently set to voice activation. I had a feeling the minutes of this particular meeting were going to be crucial. Henry broke from the pack first. He didn't walk directly toward me. He took a circuitous route, weaving through the crowd, laughing loudly at conversations he wasn't part of, grabbing a fresh glass of red wine from a passing tray. He held the glass loosely, dangerously, swinging it with the rhythm of his stride. He was playing the part of the jovial, slightly tipsy executive, but his trajectory was calculated. He was a guided missile in a tuxedo. I braced myself. I could have moved. I could have stepped behind the ice sculpture or vanished into the restroom, but I needed this.
If I was going to excise the rot from this company, I couldn't just catch them being incompetent. I needed to catch them being malicious. I needed cause. Henry closed the distance. As he passed a group of shareholders, he feinted left, then lunged right, straight into my personal space. Whoops! The collision was heavy and deliberate. His shoulder slammed into my chest with the force of a linebacker, and the glass of red wine in his hand didn't just spill, it exploded. The dark crimson liquid drenched my shirt, splashing up onto my neck and jaw. The glass shattered against the marble floor with a violence that silenced the immediate vicinity. "Jesus, Gary," Henry shouted, stepping back and wiping a non-existent speck from his own pristine lapel. His voice was theatrical, projected for the back row. "Watch where you're going. You're stumbling all over the place." The music didn't stop, but the conversation did. Heads turned. I stood there, the cold wine soaking into my skin, dripping from my chin like a mock injury. "I was standing still, Henry," I said calmly, my voice low. "Standing still? You practically tackled me." Henry laughed incredulously, turning to the gathering crowd. "Guy's had a few too many on the company dime, looks like. Can't hold his liquor, can't hold a job, right?" Before I could respond, Vincent materialized. He must have been following in Henry's wake, waiting for the signal. He pushed through the onlookers, his face a mask of practiced outrage. "What is the meaning of this?" Vincent demanded, not looking at Henry, but squarely at me. "Gary's wasted, Dad," Henry said, shaking his head with mock disappointment. "He just plowed into me. Look at him. He's a mess." Vincent stepped into my personal space, wrinkling his nose. "You smell like a distillery, Gary." "I smell like club soda and the Merlot Henry just threw on me, Vincent, and I'm drinking soda." "Don't lie to me," Vincent snapped, his volume rising. "I've been watching you all night, lurking in the corners, knocking back drinks, and now you're assaulting senior executives? This isn't a frat party. This is the Sterling Corporation gala." "Is there a problem here, Mr. Sterling?" The crowd parted for a man in a gray suit, David, the director of employee relations. He was a good man, a by-the-book HR professional who had been marginalized by Rihanna's department for years. He looked nervous, his eyes darting between Vincent and the shattered glass. "Gary, is this true?" "It's a misunderstanding, David," I began. "It is not a misunderstanding." Rihanna's voice cut through the air as she joined the fray, completing the pincer maneuver. "I saw the whole thing from across the room. Gary lunged at Henry. It was unprovoked and frankly frightening." The lie was seamless. They were a phalanx of deception, backing each other up with the ease of people who had done this 1,000 times before. I looked at Jennifer, who was hovering at the edge of the circle, her face pale. She chewed her lip, looking at her shoes. She wouldn't speak. The silence was her signature. "Rihanna," David said, deferring to her boss but looking uncomfortable, "if there's an accusation of physical altercation, we need to follow protocol. Statements, security footage." "I am the vice president of human resources, David," she hissed, stepping close enough that only the inner circle could hear. "I am telling you what happened. You will file the report for gross misconduct and intoxication in the workplace, and you will have security escort him out tonight. We cannot have a loose cannon endangering our guests." She turned her gaze to me, her eyes cold and hard as diamonds. "Consider your contract terminated, Gary. We'll mail you your final check, deducted for the dry cleaning, of course." Vincent crossed his arms, a smirk playing on his lips. "You heard her. Get out. And don't bother coming in on Monday to beg. You're done in this town." I looked at David, who looked miserable. He pulled out his tablet, topping in the incident notes, his fingers shaking slightly. He was writing my termination. "I understand," I said, my voice calm, almost bored. It wasn't the reaction they wanted. They wanted begging. They wanted a scene. They wanted the satisfaction of watching the poor relation crumble. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a handkerchief, and wiped the wine from my cheek. "You're filing a formal complaint for termination based on these witness statements. That's the official record. That's the record. Now move." "Okay," I just wanted to be clear. I didn't argue. I didn't look at Jennifer. I turned and walked toward the exit, the wet squish of my wine-soaked shoe on the marble being the only sound I made. Behind me, I heard Henry let out a bark of laughter, followed by clinking of glasses. Finally took out the trash, I heard Bradley say. I walked past the security guards who were moving to intercept me, nodding to them politely. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, shutting out the noise of the party and the sight of my wife refusing to meet my eyes, I reached into my jacket and stopped the recording. They thought they had just fired a nuisance. They didn't know they had just handed the CEO a signed confession of conspiracy, slander, and wrongful termination. Monday morning wasn't going to be a disciplinary hearing. It was going to be a bloodbath. The cab ride home was a quiet blur of city lights and simmering adrenaline. I stared out the window, watching the reflection of my stained shirt in the glass, the dark splotches of Merlot looking like old bruises. The driver didn't say a word, likely judging the disheveled man in the back seat who smelled like a vineyard floor, but I didn't care. My mind was already 3 moves ahead, replaying the audio file in my head, cross-referencing it with the termination clauses in the employee handbook. They had handed me the smoking gun, and on Monday, I was going to pull the trigger. When I unlocked the front door of our townhouse, the silence that greeted me wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pressurized, like the air before a thunderstorm. Jennifer was already home. Her heels were kicked off by the door and her clutch lay discarded on the hallway table. I could hear her in the living room, the clinking of ice against glass. I walked in, unbuttoning my ruined jacket. Jennifer was standing by the window, looking out at the dark street. She was still in her emerald gown, but her posture had collapsed. She looked tired, small, and utterly defeated. When she turned to face me, her eyes were red-rimmed, but there was no softness in them. There was only the cold, hard resolve of a Sterling. "Dottie called me from the limo," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the hysteria I had expected. "He put me on speaker with Mom and Henry. They told me everything." I tossed my jacket onto the armchair. "Everything? Did they tell you Henry tackled me? Did they tell you Vincent didn't even let me speak?" "They told me you were stumbling drunk," she cut in, her voice rising sharply. "They told me you assaulted Henry, that you embarrassed the family in front of the shareholders, the board members, everyone who matters." "And you believe that?" I asked, looking her dead in the eye. "You really believe I walked into that party, had 5 drinks in 20 minutes, and decided to tackle your brother?" "I believe my eyes, Gary," she gestured wildly at my shirt. "Look at you. You're covered in wine. You smell like a bar mat. I saw you standing in the corner all night, skulking around like you hated everyone. Is it really so hard to believe that you snapped? That you just couldn't handle being in a room where you didn't belong?" The words hit harder than Henry's shoulder check. It wasn't just that she believed them, it was that she wanted to believe them. It was easier for her to accept that her husband was a screw-up than to accept that her family was cruel. If I was the villain, the world made sense. If I was the victim, she was complicit. "I didn't drink, Jen. I had club soda. Henry threw his glass at me." "Stop," she whispered, holding up a hand. "Just stop lying. It's pathetic. It's over, Gary." She walked over to the sideboard and poured herself another drink. Her hands were shaking. "Mom says she fired you on the spot, but Vincent, he's willing to be generous. If you resign formally, in writing, by tomorrow morning, they won't contest your unemployment claim. They'll keep the gross misconduct charge off your official record. They'll let you leave with some shred of dignity." "Dignity?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "You want me to resign for my dignity?" "You want me to resign for mine," she shouted, the glass trembling in her hand. "Do you have any idea what this does to me? I have to walk into that office on Monday. I have to face my colleagues, my team. I have to be Sterling's daughter who married the drunk. You are humiliating me, Gary. You are dragging me down." She took a breath, composing herself, retreating back into the icy shell her mother had modeled for her. "If you fight this, they will destroy you. Vincent will blacklist you. You'll never work in the city again. For once in your life, just do the smart thing. Go quietly. Save the family from further embarrassment." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the stranger she had become. I saw the fear behind her eyes, the terror of losing her status, of being cast out of the golden circle. She loved me, maybe, in her own way, but she loved the Sterling name more. She was asking me to fall on my sword so she wouldn't get blood on her shoes. I could have told her then. I could have pulled out the dictaphone. I could have told her that on Monday morning I would have the power to fire her father, her mother, and her brothers. I could have told her that I was the one holding the keys to the kingdom. But I realized with a sudden clarifying calm that it wouldn't matter. If I told her I was the CEO, she wouldn't stay because she believed in me. She would stay because she believed in the power. And I didn't want that. I didn't want an ally who only joined the winning side after the war was over. So I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I didn't beg her to see the truth. I just nodded. "Okay," I said softly. Jennifer let out a long, shuddering breath, her shoulders sagging with relief. She thought she had won. She thought she had managed the crisis. Good. Write the letter tonight. Send it to Rihanna's personal email. We can figure out the rest later. She walked past me toward the bedroom, pausing only to brush a hand against my arm, a token gesture of affection now that I was back in my box. "Sleep in the guest room tonight, Gary. You smell like wine." I watched her close the bedroom door, the click of the latch echoing in the hallway. I stood alone in the dark living room, the silence finally absolute. I wasn't going to write a resignation letter. I was going to write a manifesto. I went to the guest room, but I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, listening to the house settle. My shirt was stiff and sticky against my skin, but I didn't take it off. I wanted to remember this feeling. I wanted to remember exactly how it felt to be discarded, so that on Monday morning, when they looked at me with those same terrified eyes, I wouldn't feel a shred of mercy. Jennifer wanted me to go quietly. She wanted me to save the family from embarrassment. I nodded into the darkness. I would give her exactly what she asked for. I would save the company. The family, however, was beyond saving. Monday morning at Sterling Corp usually smelled of stale coffee and desperation, but today the air felt electric. I walked through the revolving glass doors of the lobby at 7:55 a.m. sharp. I wasn't wearing the boxy department store polyester blend today. I was wearing a charcoal three-piece that had been tailored on Savile Row, a watch that cost more than Henry's car, and a tie in the exact shade of blood in the water red. The security guard, a burly man named Marcus, who usually ignored me or asked to see my visitor pass with a sigh, straightened up as I approached the turnstiles. I didn't reach for a badge. I didn't have to. The gates beeped open before I even broke stride. Someone in IT had updated my clearance level over the weekend. When the elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, the royal family was already waiting. They were clustered by the receptionist's desk like vultures circling a carcass. Vincent was checking his watch, impatience radiating off him in waves of expensive cologne. Rihanna was inspecting her cuticles, looking bored. Henry and Bradley were leaning against the wall, snickering about something on Henry's phone. Jennifer was there too, standing slightly apart, looking pale and nauseous. She wouldn't look at the elevator. When I stepped out, the conversation died. The silence that followed wasn't the respectful hush of subordinates. It was the stunned silence of people trying to process a glitch in the matrix. They were expecting the defeated, slumped-shouldered Gary. Instead, they got a man who walked like he owned the building. Henry recovered first, pushing off the wall with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, look at this," he drawled, looking me up and down. "He dressed up for his funeral. That's cute, Gary. Trying to leave a good last impression?" "It shows respect for the process," I said, my voice cool and even, not breaking my stride. Vincent stepped forward to block my path, his face twisting into a sneer. "The only process happening today is security escorting you out of the building. You're late. The board is waiting." "I'm right on time, Vincent," I replied, stepping around him without a glance. "Just get in the room," Rihanna snapped, refusing to make eye contact as she fell into step beside me. "Let's get this over with. I have a brunch at 11. They formed a phalanx around me, marching me down the long mahogany hallway toward the main boardroom. It felt like a prisoner transfer. I could feel their anticipation, a palpable heat. They were giddy with it. This was their favorite sport, kicking someone when they were down. To them, I was a dead man walking, a nuisance finally being removed for removal. Jennifer walked behind me, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm of anxiety. She kept her head down, likely praying I wouldn't make a scene, wouldn't beg, wouldn't drag her down with me. We reached the double-glass doors of the boardroom. Vincent pushed them open with a flourish, gesturing for me to enter first. "After you, Gary. Take a good look. It's the last time you'll see the inside of an executive suite." The room was imposing, dominated by a 20-foot table of polished walnut and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline I had come to conquer. At the head of the table sat Arthur Vance, the interim CEO. Arthur was a legend in the industry, a turnaround specialist known for his ruthlessness and his poker face. He was 70 years old with eyes like flint and a reputation for eating executives for breakfast. He didn't look up when we entered. He was reading a file, my file. "Sit," Vincent commanded, pointing to a lonely, low-backed chair positioned away from the table, clearly placed there for the accused. The family took their seats along one side of the table, arranging their notebooks and pens with self-important bustling. Vincent sat at the right hand of the head chair, assuming his position as the heir apparent. Rihanna sat next to him, then Henry, then Bradley. Jennifer took a seat near the back, trying to make herself invisible. I didn't sit in the low chair. I remained standing, adjusting my cuffs. "Sit down, Gary," Henry hissed. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Arthur Vance finally looked up. He closed the file and placed his hands flat on the table. The room went deathly quiet. "We are here," Vincent began, his voice booming with authority, "to address the incident at the gala and to formally terminate the contract of Mr. Gary—" "Quiet, Vincent," Arthur said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice was dry and brittle, like old paper, but it carried the weight of absolute power. Vincent blinked, his mouth hanging open for a fraction of a second. Excuse me, Arthur, I was just outlining the agenda." "I know the agenda," Arthur said. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I have reviewed the incident report filed by HR. I have reviewed the witness statements provided by Mr. and Mrs. Sterling and their sons." "Exactly," Rihanna said, leaning forward. "It's an open and shut case of gross misconduct. We expect immediate termination." "There will be terminations today," Arthur agreed, a small wintry smile touching his lips. "But we have a slight procedural issue." "What issue?" Bradley blurted out. "He tackled Henry. He was drunk." Arthur ignored him. He stood up slowly, picking up the heavy leather portfolio in front of him. "The issue," Arthur said, "is that I am not the one who decides the future of this company anymore. As of 8 a.m. this morning, my tenure as interim CEO has concluded." Confusion rippled down the table. Vincent frowned. "What? We haven't voted on a replacement. The search committee hasn't even presented candidates." "The board has been conducting a stealth search for 6 months. We wanted a candidate who could see the company from the ground up, someone who could identify the rot without being part of the ecosystem, someone who could operate undercover." I took a step toward the table. Arthur turned to me, and for the first time the flint in his eyes sparked with genuine amusement. He gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table, the seat of power. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur said, his voice ringing with finality, "it is my distinct honor to introduce you to your new permanent CEO and chairman of the board." He looked directly at Vincent, whose face had gone the color of curdled milk. "Mr. Gary Mitchell." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the room. Vincent froze, half rising from his chair. Rihanna dropped her expensive pen. It clattered loudly on the walnut table. Henry and Bradley looked at each other, their smirks frozen in a grotesque rigor mortis. Jennifer let out a small, strangled gasp from the back of the room. When I stepped out, I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply walked past the low chair they had set out for me. I walked past Henry, who shrank back as if I were radioactive. I walked past Vincent, who was staring at me with the eyes of a man watching a train run over him. I reached the head of the table. Arthur Vance stepped aside, nodding respectfully. I buttoned my jacket and sat down in the high-backed leather chair. It was comfortable. It felt like a throne. I placed my hands on the table, interlacing my fingers, and looked down the line of my in-laws. I saw the fear dawning in their eyes, the terrible, crushing realization of what they had done and who they had done it to. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm, professional, and utterly terrifying. "We have a lot to get through. Let's start with the audit."
The leather of the CEO's chair creaked softly as I settled into it, a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the mausoleum-quiet boardroom. I placed a thick, leather-bound portfolio on the mahogany surface in front of me. It wasn't the flimsy resignation letter Jennifer had begged me to write the night before. It was 3 inches of high-density forensic accounting, bound in black, heavy with the weight of their ruin. Vincent was the first to find his voice, though it sounded strangled, stripped of its usual baritone boom. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white, staring at me as if I were a hallucination. This is a joke," he stammered, looking wildly at Arthur Vance, who had taken a seat near the window, watching the proceedings with the detached interest of a judge. "Arthur, tell me this is some kind of sick joke. Gary? CEO? The man is a data entry clerk." "I was never a data entry clerk, Vincent," I said, my voice cutting through his panic. "I was the lead auditor for the board's special committee on internal corruption. The low-level access you mocked gave me clearance to view every single transaction, every expense report, and every vendor contract in the system. For 6 months, while you were busy treating me like furniture, I was busy reading your mail." Rihanna let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. You don't have the education, the pedigree. You're a nobody." I didn't argue. I simply opened the black portfolio. The sound of the heavy paper turning was crisp and deliberate. I pulled out a single sheet, a spreadsheet highlighted in neon yellow, and slid it down the long, polished table. It spun perfectly, coming to a rest directly in front of Vincent. "Let's start with operations," I said, folding my hands, "specifically the logistics contracts with Vanguard Shipping Solutions. Does that name ring a bell, Vincent?" Vincent stared at the paper, his face draining of color until it matched the starched white of his collar. He didn't speak. For the benefit of the room, I continued, looking at the other board members who had quietly filed in during the commotion. Vanguard Shipping has billed Sterling Corp $4 million over the last 3 fiscal years for expedited freight services, a significant expense. The only problem is Vanguard Shipping doesn't own any trucks. They don't own any ships. In fact, their registered business address is a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. I pulled out another document, a bank transfer record, and the sole signatory for Vanguard's corporate account, a Mr. V. Sterling. You weren't even creative enough to use a pseudonym. That's an investment vehicle," Vincent sputtered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "It's a holding company for strategic partnerships. You don't understand high-level finance, Gary." "I understand theft, Vincent," I corrected him. "You've been approving invoices for services that were never rendered and funneling the money directly into your offshore accounts. That's not finance, that's embezzlement, and it's a federal crime." A gasp came from the back of the room. I didn't look back to see if it was Jennifer. I kept my eyes locked on Rihanna, whose mask of boredom was beginning to crack, revealing the terror underneath. She reached for her water glass, her hand trembling so badly the ice clinked against the sides. "And human resources," I said, turning my gaze to her. "The department meant to enforce the rules." "I have nothing to hide," Rihanna snapped, though her voice lacked its usual venom. "My department is impeccable." "Is it?" I flipped a page in the file. "Let's talk about the Employee Retention and Client Relations Discretionary Fund. It's a massive budget, meant for galas, gifts, executive courting. But I noticed a pattern. The clients being courted were remarkably consistent." I slid a photograph across the table. It was a high-resolution image of the diamond choker she had been wearing at the gala on Saturday night, the same one she had touched while telling me to clear her table.
Saturday night, I said, you were wearing a Van Cleef & Arpels diamond choker. Beautiful piece. Retail value, $85,000. I slid the invoice next to the photo. Billed to the corporate Amex on Thursday under consulting fees, VCA Associates. I checked the vendor list, Rihanna. There is no VCA Associates. There is just a jewelry store on Fifth Avenue where you used the corporate Amex. Rihanna stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. How dare you? I am the vice president of this company. I am entitled to a salary, I interrupted, my voice rising just enough to silence her. You are not entitled to treat the corporate treasury as your personal piggy bank. I found the renovations for the Hamptons house billed as office relocation costs. I found the lease payments for Henry's Porsche categorized as fleet maintenance. I found it all. I looked at Henry and Bradley. The Golden children were shrinking in their seats, looking like children waiting for the principal to expel them. They knew what was coming. If I had dug this deep on their parents, they knew I had the records of their gambling debts, their no-show jobs, their complete lack of contribution to the company they claimed to lead. You thought I was quiet because I was weak, you said, addressing the entire family. You thought I took your insults because I had no choice. But I was just gathering data. Every time you mocked my cheap suit, you were talking to the man who was tracking your stolen millions. Every time you called me a parasite, you were stealing from the host. Vincent slammed his hand on the table, trying to summon the ghost of his former authority. This is illegal. You hacked private records. This is inadmissible. I'll sue you for defamation. I'll sue this entire company. It's not hacking when you own the data, Vincent, Arthur Vance said from the corner, his voice dry as dust. Gary has had full authorization from the audit committee since day one. Everything here is legal, documented, and ready for the district attorney. The mention of the district attorney sucked the last bit of oxygen out of the room. Vincent slumped back in his chair, a defeated man. Rihanna put a hand over her mouth, a sob escaping through her fingers. I closed the black portfolio. The sound was final. I expected a resignation letter from you today, Gary, Vincent whispered, staring at the polished wood table as if it could swallow him whole. I know, I said, but unlike you, I do my job. I pressed the intercom button on the console in front of me. Security, you can come in now. The double doors opened, but it wasn't the security guards coming to drag me out. It was a team of 4 uniformed officers, followed by the company's legal counsel. They weren't there to escort a drunk employee from the building. They were there to escort a criminal conspiracy from the boardroom. You have a choice, I said, standing up. You can sign the admissions of guilt I've prepared, pay back every cent you stole, and leave with the termination for cause, or we can hand this file to the officers standing behind you right now. I looked at Jennifer in the back of the room. She was weeping silently, looking between her parents and me, waiting for me to save them, waiting for me to be the husband who fixed things, who absorbed the pain so they didn't have to. But the husband she knew didn't exist anymore. He had been fired on Saturday night. Choose, I said.
The silence in the boardroom was broken only by the sound of thick, crisp paper hitting the mahogany table. I didn't slide these documents. I placed them with the deliberate weight of a judge passing sentence. 1 stock for Vincent, 1 for Rihanna, 2 smaller but no less damning stocks for Henry and Bradley. These are your termination notices, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air. Effective immediately. Vincent snatched the papers, his hands trembling so violently the pages rattled. He scanned the first paragraph, his face twisting from pale shock to a deep vascular purple. Termination for cause? He sputtered, looking up at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. For cause? Do you have any idea what that means? I know exactly what it means, Vincent, I replied, leaning back in the leather chair. It means no severance, no golden parachute, no vesting of your remaining stock options, and certainly no continued health benefits. You can't do this, Rihanna shrieked, finally finding her voice. She slapped her hand down on the table, her diamond rings clicking against the wood.
We have contracts. We have tenure. My pension alone is worth millions. You can't just wipe that away with a piece of paper." "You wiped it away yourself," I said, pointing to the forensic audit file still sitting open on the table. Clause 14, Section B of your employment agreement explicitly states that any act of fraud, embezzlement, or misappropriation of company funds results in the immediate forfeiture of all accumulated benefits. You didn't just spend the company's money, Rihanna. You spent your own retirement. "This is entrapment," Henry shouted, jumping to his feet. He looked less like a corporate executive and more like a cornered animal. "You set us up. You watched us. That's invasion of privacy." "It's corporate oversight, Henry," Arthur Vance said from the corner, his voice cool and detached. "And considering you used your company email to coordinate your betting pools, you didn't leave much privacy to invade." "I won't sign this," Vincent snarled, crumpling the termination notice in his fist. He threw the ball of paper at me. It bounced harmlessly off my chest. "I built this department. I am this company. You think you can just throw me out like some temp?" "You didn't build the department, Vincent," I said, brushing the crumpled paper off the table. "You hollowed it out. You treated Sterling Corp like an ATM that never asked for a PIN. And as for throwing you out, yes, that is exactly what is happening." I looked toward the door where the security team was waiting. "Marcus?" The large security guard I had passed in the lobby stepped forward. He looked different in the boardroom, larger, more imposing. He wasn't the board man checking badges anymore. He was the enforcement arm of the new administration. "Yes, Mr. Mitchell?" Marcus asked, his deep voice filling the room. "Please escort Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling, and their sons from the building. They are to be allowed to collect their personal effects, keys, wallets, photos, nothing electronic. No laptops, no tablets, no hard drives. Someone from IT will accompany them to ensure no company data leaves the premises." "You're having us escorted out?" Rihanna gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Like criminals?" "Like terminated employees who pose a security risk," I corrected. "It's standard protocol. You know the drill, Rihanna. You wrote the policy." The irony hit them like a physical blow. I saw the memory of Saturday night flicker behind their eyes, the way they had tried to have me dragged out of the gala, branded a drunk, humiliated in front of the elite. They wanted a spectacle. Now they were getting one. "I'm not going anywhere," Vincent declared, crossing his arms. "I'm sitting right here until my lawyer arrives. You'll have to drag me out." I looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Vincent. It wasn't a fair fight. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus said, stepping closer, "please don't make this difficult. The officers in the hallway are happy to assist if you refuse to comply." Vincent looked at the uniformed police officers visible through the glass doors. He looked at Arthur Vance, who offered him nothing but a cold stare. He looked at his children. Henry and Bradley were already backing away, looking terrified, and Jennifer was sobbing quietly in the corner, her face buried in her hands. The fight went out of him all at once. His shoulders slumped, his posture collapsing from arrogance to defeat in a single second. He looked old. "Fine," Vincent spat, standing up. He tried to straighten his jacket, to reclaim some shred of dignity, but the air of authority was gone. "You'll hear from my attorneys, Gary. This isn't over. I'll bury you in litigation for the next 10 years. "You're welcome to try, Vincent," I said calmly, "but legal fees are expensive, and as of 5 minutes ago, you're unemployed." Rihanna stood up, grabbing her purse. She didn't look at me. She looked at Jennifer. "Jennifer," she hissed, "are you coming or are you staying with this monster?" Jennifer looked up, her mascara running, her eyes wide and panicked. She looked at her mother, then at me. She started to stand, her instinct to follow the family kicking in, but I didn't look at her. I turned my attention back to my paperwork. "Marcus," I said, dismissing them, "get them out." The security team moved in. It was a chaotic, shuffling procession. Henry and Bradley tried to blend into the background, but were corralled toward the door. Rihanna walked with her head high, pretending she was leaving of her own volition, though the security guard at her elbow told a different story. Vincent paused at the door, looking back at the boardroom, the kingdom he thought he owned, one last time. "You're nothing," he sneered at me. "You're just a usurper in a cheap suit." "It's a Savile Roy suit, Vincent," I said, not looking up from the file, "and it's paid for." The doors closed behind them, cutting off the sound of Rihanna's protests and Henry's nervous stammering. The silence rushed back into the room, but this time it wasn't heavy, it was clean. It felt like the air after a fever breaks. I sat alone at the head of the table, the empty chairs of my in-laws serving as a testament to the purge. Jennifer was still in the back of the room, standing frozen near the window. I could hear her breathing, jagged and wet. Arthur Vance stood up slowly, nodding to me. "I'll let you handle the rest, Gary. Good work." He walked out, leaving me alone with my wife. The boardroom felt massive, a cavern of glass and wood. I picked up a pen and signed the bottom of the first termination notice. 1 down, 3 to go. The family was gone. Now I just had to deal with the fallout. The silence that descended on Sterling Corp in the 48 hours following the board meeting was absolute, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the Sterling family's implosion. The paper tigers didn't just fall, they disintegrated. Stripped of their titles, their expense accounts, and their terrified subordinates, Vincent and Rihanna were revealed to be exactly what I had always known they were: hollow shells held together by arrogance and other people's money. The crumbling began on Tuesday. It started with the legal threats, blustery letters from high-priced firms threatening scorched earth litigation. By Wednesday, when those lawyers likely realized their clients' assets were frozen and the evidence against them was irrefutable, the tone shifted. The threats stopped. The begging began. Vincent was the first to break. He didn't come to the building. Marcus and his team had made it clear that any attempt to set foot on the premises would result in a trespassing arrest, so he called. He called my direct line, a number he had never deigned to learn when I was just his son-in-law. I put him on speakerphone, letting his voice fill the expansive quiet of the CEO's office. "Gary?" he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that grated on my nerves. "Look, let's cut the theater. I know how the game is played. You made your point. You swung the big stick. Bravo." "It's not a game, Vincent," I said, signing a purchase order that legitimized a vendor he had been stiffing for months. And the point wasn't mine to make, it was the law's. "The law is flexible," Vincent insisted, the desperation leaking through his forced camaraderie. "Listen to me, I have reserves, strategic funds that aren't on the books, accounts in the Caymans that your audit missed. I can give you the keys, 20%. That's $5 million, Gary, cash, untraceable. Just rescind the for-cause designation. Let me keep my pension. Let me retire with my reputation intact." I stopped writing. The audacity was breathtaking. Even with the noose around his neck, he was still trying to cut a side deal. He truly believed that everyone had a price because he had a price. "You're trying to bribe the CEO of the company you stole from with money you stole from that same company," I said, my voice flat. "I'm recording this call, Vincent. I'll be forwarding the audio to the district attorney to add to your file. I suggest you save that money for your bail." I hung up before he could stutter a response. Rihanna's approach was less transactional, but no less pathetic. She didn't call, she sent emails, long, rambling diatribes that vacillated between vitriol and victimization. She invoked the sanctity of family, rewriting history to paint herself as a benevolent matriarch who had taken in a stray. "After everything we did for you," one message read, "we welcomed you into our home. We gave you a seat at our table. Is this how you repay us? By destroying the legacy we built for our children? You are a cruel, heartless man." I deleted it without replying. The seat at the table she mentioned was the one she ordered me to clear her dishes. The welcome was the wine her son threw in my face. But the final blow came on Thursday afternoon. My assistant, a capable woman named Sarah whom Vincent had terrorized for years, buzzed me with a hesitation in her voice. "Mr. Mitchell, your wife is here. She says it's urgent. I stared at the closed door. I knew this moment was coming. Jennifer had been silent since the boardroom, a ghost in her own house while I stayed at a hotel. I told Sarah to let her in. Jennifer looked like she hadn't slept since Saturday. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore a gray suit that seemed too big for her, as if she had shrunk under the weight of the week's events. She didn't storm in. She walked in slowly, closing the door behind her and leaning against it for support. "Jennifer," she said, her voice cracking. "Jennifer," I replied, remaining seated. I didn't offer her a chair. I didn't offer her comfort. I was the chairman of the board right now, and she was an emissary from a hostile faction. "You have to stop this," she said, tears welling up instantly. "Please, my father, he's talking about bankruptcy. Mom is hysterical. They're going to lose the house, the cars, everything. You've stripped them bare." "I didn't strip them, Jen. The audit did. They spent money they didn't have." "They're my parents," she cried, stepping away from the door and approaching the desk. "They're your family. How can you be so cold? I know they were hard on you. I know they weren't perfect. But to ruin them, to call the police, it's vindictive, Gary. It's cruel." She placed her hands on the desk, leaning in, her eyes searching mine for the husband she thought she could manipulate. "Have a heart, Gary. Please, just drop the charges. Give them a severance. Let them walk away. Do it for me." "Have a heart?" I repeated slowly, testing the weight of the phrase. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "You ask me to have a heart, Jen, but I need you to answer one question for me." "Anything," she breathed, thinking she had broken through. I turned back to face her. "On Saturday night, when Henry threw that wine on me, when Vincent told HR I was a drunk, when Rihanna laughed when I was being dragged out by security, where was your heart then?" Jennifer flinched, opening her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "You knew I wasn't drunk. You knew I didn't tackle Henry. You knew they were lying. And you stood there. You let them humiliate me. You told me to resign to save your embarrassment." "I was scared. I didn't want to make a scene." "No, it wasn't just fear. It was sport. For years, ruining me was your family's favorite pastime. It was the dinner table conversation. It was the bonding activity. You all played with my livelihood, my dignity, and my sanity like it was a game. You tried to get me fired not because I was incompetent, but because it was fun for you." I walked back to the desk and picked up the forensic file. "This isn't sport, Jennifer. This isn't a game. This is accountability. They stole millions. They defrauded investors. They rotted this company from the inside out. I'm not ruining them for fun. I'm firing them because they are criminals." "You're my wife," she sobbed, the last card in her deck. "Doesn't that mean anything?" "It means you should have known better, and it means you should have spoken up when you had the chance." I sat back down, signaling the end of the audience. "Go home, Jennifer. Tell your parents that the bribery attempts and the guilt trips won't work. The audit is final. And tell them if they contact me again, I'll add harassment to the list of charges." She stood there for a long moment, staring at the stranger in the CEO's chair. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar. I watched her go, feeling nothing but a profound sense of relief. The begging was over. The only thing left was the paperwork. The drive to the townhouse that Friday evening felt less like a commute and more like a final audit. The city rushed by in streaks of neon and brake lights, but the interior of my car was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the rustle of the manila envelope on the passenger seat. Inside that envelope wasn't a spreadsheet or a forensic report. It was the dissolution of a partnership that had failed long before the first signature was inked. When I unlocked the front door, the house was quiet. The tension that had vibrated through the hallways earlier in the week had settled into a stagnant, heavy dread. I found Jennifer in the living room, sitting on the edge of the sofa in the dark, staring at a powered-off television. She was still wearing the same gray suit she had worn to my office the day before, crumpled now, as if she hadn't moved in 24 hours. She looked up as I entered, her eyes swollen and red. For a fleeting second, I saw a spark of hope, a desperate, illogical belief that I had come home to announce a reprieve, that I had fixed it, that I had used my new power to rewind time and scrub the stain from the Sterling name. "Did you do it?" she whispered, her voice raspy. "Did you stop the lawyers?" I didn't answer immediately. I walked to the armchair, the one Henry used to sit in while mocking my career, and sat down, placing the envelope on the coffee table between us. "The lawyers are doing their job, Jen," I said quietly, "just like I'm doing mine." The hope in her eyes died, replaced instantly by the familiar flash of Sterling resentment. "So that's it? You're just going to let them burn? After everything?" "They burned themselves," I replied. "I just stopped supplying the fuel." "I don't know who you are anymore," she spat, shaking her head. "The Gary I married was kind. He was patient. He wouldn't destroy a family over money." "The Gary you married was a prop. I was a safe bet. I was the quiet, unemployed husband who made you feel superior. I was the placeholder who allowed you to play the role of the benevolent breadwinner while your family picked my bones clean." I leaned forward, topping the envelope. "You didn't marry me, Jennifer. You married your parents' image of what a husband should be. Manageable, inferior, someone who would never outshine the golden children." "That's not true," she protested, though her voice wavered. "I loved you." "You loved the stability," I corrected. "But when you had to choose between my dignity and your family's vanity, you chose them every single time. Even on Saturday night, when you thought I was down and out, you didn't try to help me up. You told me to stay down so I wouldn't embarrass you." She fell silent, looking at the envelope. She knew what it was. The Sterling instinct for self-preservation was too sharp to miss the obvious. Is this it?" she asked, her hand hovering over the clasp. "It's the new ledger. Irreconcilable differences. I'm not asking for the house. I'm not asking for alimony. I just want a clean break. No severance package, no golden parachute, just an end to the contract." She picked up the papers, her tears falling onto the cover page. "You're really leaving me? Now? When I have nothing?" "You have exactly what you wanted," I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. "You have your family. You have their legacy. You can spend the rest of your life defending their reputation, but you won't do it with me standing next to you." I didn't wait for her to sign it. I didn't wait for the inevitable bargaining or the next wave of guilt. I turned and walked out of the townhouse, leaving my key on the entry table. The click of the door latch behind me was the most satisfying sound I had heard all week. Final, precise, and absolute. 6 months later, the view from the 42nd floor was clear. The morning fog had burned off, revealing the sprawling city that moved to the rhythm of capital and commerce. My office, the corner suite that once was a terrifying altar of authority, was now quiet, streamlined, and efficient. I sat in the leather chair watching the Bloomberg terminal on my screen. The ticker symbol for Sterling Corp, or STR, flashed green, up 12 points since the opening bell, up 40% since the Great Purge, as the financial press had dubbed it. The market loved clarity. It loved leadership that didn't treat the Treasury like a personal piggy bank. The forensic audit was painful, resulting in a restatement of earnings that shocked Wall Street, but the recovery had been swift. We were leaner now. The dead weight was gone. I took a sip of black coffee and clicked open the final legal brief on my desk. The summary was concise. Vincent and Rihanna had settled the civil suits, liquidating their Hamptons estate and the Bentley to pay back a fraction of what they owed. They were currently living in a rented condo in Jersey, uninvited from the galas they used to rule. Henry and Broadley were working in sales for a mid-tier logistics firm, entry-level positions where, I imagine, they were learning the hard way that killer instinct didn't compensate for incompetence. And Jennifer. The divorce had been finalized last week. She had kept the townhouse, but without the Sterling Corp executive salary to support it, it was already on the market. I heard she had gone back to using her maiden name. It seemed fitting. She was married to that name more than she had ever been married to me. I closed the file and archived it. The Sterling family folder was dragged into the trash bin. Empty trash. confirm. A knock at the door broke my reverie. Sarah, my assistant, poked her head in, smiling. "Mr. Mitchell, the board is ready for the quarterly review, and the analysts from Goldman are on line 1. "Tell them I'm on my way," I said. I stood up, adjusting the cuffs of my bespoke suit. I looked at my reflection in the glass of the window. Not the tired, stained man at the gala, not the invisible husband in the background, but the architect of his own vindication. The stock was rising, the books were balanced, and for the first time in years, the ledger of my life showed a surplus. I was finally free.